Welcome. We're going to spend a few minutes going over recent upgrades to the Maine Forest Service fire weather and fire danger system, how it will impact you, the field user, and what you should expect. Most of these updates will take place by April 1st, 2018, with a few pieces continuing in the coming months. We'll start with a review of the basics of fire danger and fire weather principles. The National Fire Danger Rating System is a mathematical model that combines generalized vegetation and slope data with hourly weather observations to predict the relative seriousness of burning conditions. So what this means is there's a federal computer system, computer program, that is used across the lower 48 and into Alaska that uses some vegetation data, which we provide, some slope data, which we provide, and then hourly weather observations that come from a variety of weather stations to predict how challenging the fire behavior will be on any given day. In Maine, we use this NFDRS system. So NFDRS predicts how difficult it will be to contain a fire, which is different than extinguishing a fire. So for example, in the spring, we can have very high fire danger. The fire can be difficult to contain because it's fast moving, but it's relatively easy to extinguish. There's not a lot of prolonged mop up. The ground itself, the surface is dry, but the duff and litter are relatively moist. On the other hand, in late summer, we can get fires on moderate fire danger days, and we can contain them relatively quickly, within an hour or two, but they can take another day or two to fully mop up. The fire is burning deep in the ground and requires lots of manpower or machinery. Again, a reminder, fire danger zones in Maine are large, and variations among those zones are likely. So NFDRS is predicting the worst case scenario, so sort of the steepest slopes, the heaviest fuel, and the most wind. NFDRS is not a predictor of how many fires will occur, and that can be difficult to wrap your head around, because what happens is as the fire danger goes up, we feel like we have more fires, and probably that's because ignition sources are there all the time, people doing debris burning, people with campfires, etc. But usually we don't have too many escaped campfires or escaped debris burns, etc., or even railroad fires or things like that if it's not very dry. So we feel like as the fire danger goes up, we get more fires, but in all reality, they're not tied together. NFDRS is not a predictor of fire behavior in a specific location. There are computer programs and computer models that can help you predict fire behavior on any given point. You load very specific information about the slope, about the vegetation, or the fuels, and the weather, and it will give you fairly accurate results or predictions as to how likely the fire is to move across the landscape. But that's not NFDRS. This is much broader. So, as a reminder, NFDRS is just one tool that you combine with other local knowledge, other local factors, and it will help managers determine staffing and response to wildland fires. Fuels do not ignite readily, although lightning, etc., may start fires. Moderate. Fires can start from most accidental causes, but again, the number of starts is generally low. High. Fine dead fuels, which are your grasses, your pine needles, your leaf litter, that sort of thing, they'll all ignite readily, and fires will start easily from most causes. Very high fires start from all causes, and quickly after ignition spread rapidly. And extreme fires start quickly, spread furiously, and burn intensely. All fires are potentially serious. Now we're going to go over some National Weather Service products that are tied to fire weather. So there are red flag warnings and fire weather watches, which are predictions issued by the National Weather Service. Here in Maine, that's either the Caribou office or the Gray office, in consultation with local fire managers, which for the state of Maine is the forest rangers. These warnings mean that conditions are occurring or imminent, whereas watches mean conditions are favorable or expected, but are not occurring or imminent. And those watches and warnings are the exact same terminology that are used for hurricanes, snowstorms, flooding. If you see a warning, it means the conditions are basically either happening now or very shortly expected to happen. And watches mean it's likely to happen, but it's not yet happening. So for us in the fire world, that means a red flag warning is issued to let us know that we're going to have combustion and rapid spread within the next 12 hours. The conditions are good for that. So usually that means the morning forecast for the National Weather Service comes out, you get a red flag warning, and that basically means today. The next daylight period is going to have issues. Whereas we see a fire weather watch, that's usually issued 2 to 3 days in advance, and it means that it's likely that we'll see red flag conditions when we get a little bit closer, but we're not yet there. So again, red flag warnings and fire weather watches are predictions issued by the National Weather Service. They do call and speak to forest ranger supervisors in regards to this, but it is a National Weather Service product. So in Maine, we have several criteria that we have to meet. These are objective criteria in order to have either a red flag warning or a fire weather watch. So our 1 hour and 10 hour fuel moistures need to average less than 10% fuel moisture. So 1 hour fuels again are your grasses, your leaf litter, your pine needles, that sort of thing. 10 hour fuels are basically any sticks or twigs less than the size of your pinky finger. And reminder, those are dead fuels. So those aren't branches on live trees, those are branches that have fallen to the forest floor. So in addition to having those two average less than 10%, we need wind speeds to be greater than 10 miles an hour and humidities to be less than 35 miles an hour. Less than 35%. And as you can see, the lower the humidity, the less wind you need, and the lower the higher the wind speed, the higher the humidity can be. Basically, in these boxes where it says RF, that's when you'll get a red flag condition. Those are the same criteria for a fire weather watch, but the fire weather watch will be issued 2 to 3 days in advance of the conditions. System. So this has been a multi-year project with a number of partners. We've worked with the National Weather Service, Rainwise, which is a company in Trenton that is providing our weather stations and a lot of the computer modeling to work in the background. Eastern Area Coordination Center, which is a an office in Minnesota that does some high-level coordination of wildfire response for the Northeast, and some folks out of the Rocky Mountain Research Station and the U.S. Forest Service in the western portion of the U.S. And we also have some private landowners who have been assisting us. So we have a number of goals with this upgrade. The first goal is to produce better fire danger information for rangers, for town wardens, for fire chiefs, for firefighters, and for the public. So what we're going to do to get this is we've installed more stations and we have smaller fire weather zones, which should give us a better point-to-point accuracy. So this is the old map that many of you are familiar with. We had 7 fire weather zones statewide and 24 weather stations. Our new zones, you can see the state's been chopped up into 12 zones, and there'll be 41 stations. Rangers and support staff. So our old system required manual data entry and notifications to be made. This was done when we had 7 days of support staff, 7 days a week. Our own folks doing dispatching and office work. Those positions have been eliminated. So we really were relying on an ever-changing group of people to make those notifications happen, which wasn't sustainable. So the new system will be all fully automated. The third goal of our upgrade is to better link with regional and national fire organizations and our fire partners. So the other agencies that we work with will now have access to our data in real time. Our previous system was rather closed, and it was good for us in state, but didn't provide great information to those folks who were looking at a bigger picture. So as an example here, we have a product that's put out on a daily basis by fire folks in Boise, Idaho. And when you look at this, you see each little triangle is a weather station scattered throughout the country, providing fire danger information. If you look at Maine, we're a little slim on the triangles. So we blow in up on Maine a little bit here, and what you see is you can see the one station in northwestern Maine, and that's one of our weather stations owned by the state. And then the 4 others are very hard to see because of the coastline, but there are 4 other stations that feed that federal database. And what that means is we've had pretty good accuracy along the coast, but not great accuracy for interior Maine. I just want to draw your attention here to the state of North Carolina. They're a few years ahead of us in terms of what they've done. They put a bunch of stations out, and you can see their coverage is quite excellent across the state. And that's hopefully what ours will look like in the next year or so. So what's being upgraded with our project here? So we have physical system upgrades and then computation upgrades. So with the physical systems, we have new weather stations that have new technology on them. They have additional sensors and better station placement. And the stations now communicate either via a wireless network or a built-in cell phone. And on the computation side, we have new fire danger calculations, which are fully automated. We have a better model, and all of our data in all of our calculations will be instantaneously sent into the federal system, sort of for that regional and national picture. And for the fire danger outputs, we have a brand new website, and it has more information than just fire danger. So for those folks who are forest rangers, town wardens, fire chiefs that really have that next level of experience, there's more handy information there. Mark III long range, and this is what you see here on the right. All of these stations will have the solar radiation sensor installed, which is important for some of the calculations that are being done in the background. So annually we'll be going out, we'll be trimming the vegetation, we'll be testing and calibrating various components on the weather stations, and then every few years different components will go back to the factory for a full test and recycling out and switching out if they're, depending on how they pass their tests. So on the right here you see a completed station. This is at our Wesley Ranger Station. They're sitting on a concrete pad, and the wind sensor is 20 feet up, and the rest of the sensors are about chest height. Again, these new stations, one of the benefits is that they communicate wirelessly. So some of our remote stations have a built-in cell phone that dials up a computer network every 15 minutes or so and sends data via cell connection. And other stations where we have access to internet, the station is sending its data wirelessly back to the computer system. Really gone through the requirements and found that many of our old stations were not located in the best spots. So required setbacks include building and scattered trees need to be more than 1 times the height of obstruction. Dense trees, we need to be 7 times the height. Paved areas, we need to be more than 50 feet away. Open water and irrigated surfaces, we need to be 200 to 300 feet on the upwind side. Reflective surfaces, more than 50 feet. Dusty roads and parking areas, more than 100 feet. Significant topography, we need to be away from the gullies, peaks, steep slopes, etc. So some of our stations that we previously had were in fine spots, but many of them were located right in the front yard of a ranger station, right next to the dusty parking area, and oftentimes right close to the building. And what that meant is we probably weren't getting the most accurate wind data, and our sensors were probably getting a little choked with dust. We're switching from a 1964 model to a 1978 model, and that has some advantages. So the 78 model has different fuel models within it, and they are allowed to have a live component. And what that means is that we don't assume that all fuels are entirely cured. So in the 64 model, it assumed that every piece of dead fuel out in the landscape, every twig, every brush, was either 100% live or 100% dead. However, the 78 model will allow us to tweak the amount of moisture and, for lack of a better, liveness in those fuels. And how that applies to us is early in the spring. Think of a shrub like blueberry. Before it started growing for the spring, there's not much moisture in those leaves, but it's not fully cured either. And the same thing can go for later in the fall. At some point, that plant stops growing for the year and stops putting moisture into the leaves, but it's a gradual transition and it doesn't go instantly. So this model will allow us to do a bit better job picking apart those days, particularly early mid-spring and early mid-fall. Again, the older models treated all fuels as 100% cured. So the 78 was particularly developed for the east and the southeast, where things that are somewhat green burn. The 64 model was primarily geared toward the western United States where most of the fuel cures once for the year and then stays cured for the rest of the year. So some of the outputs from these fire danger calculations include indices that you may be familiar with if you've ever mobilized on Western fires, including KBDIs, BIs, and ERCs. And we'll go over each of those in a bit. So one thing to be aware of is that there's a new model to replace the 78 model called the 2016 model, which they're just putting the finishing touches on. And that should come sometime next winter. So the background calculations will change again, but the output that you see, the user, the fire danger class day, the KBDI, the BRC, BIs, the ERCs, those will not change. So we have a new website, mainfireweather.org. You can also go to the same page you've been going to on the state website, just your standard fire danger, and if you click on that, it will automatically take you here. So this new site is quite more interactive, and it's got a lot of good things for you, the user. So this is the main page. You can see the 12 zones, and you can see each of the black icons there represents one of our weather stations. One of the nice things about this page, you can zoom in and out on it. It's an interactive map, so you can zoom very closely and see your exact town. This should help with folks who are wondering what the fire danger is in their area. They can zoom right in to where they live and have no doubt as to which zone they're in and what their fire danger is. One other option from this main page is you click to the right of where it says fire, black icon there on the main page where you see all the weather stations. Click either one of those and you'll have a chance to see what the current observations are at any given station. What you'll get is a page that looks like this. This is the weather station at our Island Falls facility. And you can see temperature, humidity, rainfall, wind, average temperature, average humidity. So these are over a longer period. You can also see the minimum humidity for the day, the max temperature for the day. On the right-hand tab, the fire danger data, you'll see the fuel moistures, the 1 hour, the 10 hour, the 100 hour, the 1,000 hour, and some various other items. At the bottom, you'll see some graphs, and you'll be able to see how fire danger or energy release component or fuel moisture, all those things, how they change over time. Because the station is it's still definitely cold up there, a lot of the items haven't started working yet. As it starts to green up, you'll see a lot more data in those lower boxes. So again, to fire danger outputs, in addition to those class days, which we're familiar with, the low, medium, high, very high, and extremely high, the website will have other values and graphs, which we just went over some of. You're also going to get KBDI, BI, and ERC. Again, you may be familiar with these indices from Western fire mobilizations for any of those of you who have gone west before. For those of you who carry an incident response pocket guide, you can always review to pages 64 and 65 if you're in the field and you need a quick reminder of what these things mean. So KBDI is the Keach-Byram Drought Index. It's an index that relates the flammability of organic material in the ground. So what that means is it's really a measure of the litter and the duff and how well those will burn. So when we start talking about litter and duff burning, particularly duff, we're talking about drought conditions. We're no longer talking about that surface fuel. So it ranges from 0 to 800 units. And the key thing to remember about KBDI is the number that you see indicates the amount of rainfall required to reduce the index to 0, or saturation. So for example, if you saw a KBDI of 290, that means you need 2.9 inches of rain to return to 0, which means the ground is fully saturated and there's essentially no chance of a ground fire. So a little cheat sheet here. Basically, if you see 0 to 200, it's going to be springtime and after rain in the summer. 2 to 400, that's when it starts to creep up to that, then we'll start to get those campfires that burn into the ground, etc. 4 to 600, on the Maine coast in 2017, we were having stations hit 500 when we were quite dry in Eastern Hancock and Washington counties. And then 6 to 800 is quite rare in Maine. Coming out of the folks in Boise, they produce these graphs on a daily basis. So again, looking to Maine, we only see a few stations that are contributing. I think we'll see a big benefit in the future. We'll see much better resolution for those maps to get a sense of where in Maine is challenging. So energy release component. So the ERC is a number that relates to the available energy per unit area within the flaming front at the head of a fire. So what this means is basically how much intensity can there be at the front of a fire. So, given this amount of dryness, given this amount of fuel, given this amount of slope, what would be the most energy we'd see at the head of a fire? So as things dry and cure, ERC values get higher. And wind does not enter into the ERC calculation, so there's not much variability from day to day. Scale is open-ended and relative, meaning there's no theoretical limit. And a fire, when you have an ERC of 24, is twice that amount of heat release as an ERC of 12. Have here, there's kind of a lot to look at. This graph comes from Moosehorn National Wildlife Refuge in eastern Maine. What you have on the x-axis is the date moving throughout the year. So starting at January 1st, and looks like this graph goes through about May 1st. What you have on the y-axis is the actual energy release component. So that number that we were just talking about, that they referenced 12 and 24 in the past. And then we have a couple of different lines on the graph. What you see, the blue minimum, we'll start at the bottom. That's the minimum energy release component that has ever been recorded on that day between 1995 and 2018. And then we have the maximum in red, so that's the highest ERC that's ever been recorded on that day. And then we have 2006, which whoever built this graph decided to leave on there. It must have been a particularly notable year for that area. You can see several areas where the pink line, that 2006 line, is equal to the red line, the max line. So that means in those times of year, it was as dry as it's ever been in the 23 years they've been graphing it. So that's probably why they put 2006 there. So you might remember, oh, that was a rough year. How do we compare to 2006 today? And then the sort of ice blue dotted line is 2018. So that's where we currently are. And ideally, you're running these sort of projections on a daily basis or at least a weekly basis, and you're kind of watching for that 2018 line to creep up, and you want to know where that is relative to where you've been in the past. The two horizontal lines on the y-axis are the 90th and the 97th percentile. It basically is saying that if you get your current year values to exceed either the 90th or the 97th percentile, that means only 10 or 3% of the days, respectively, over the past 23 years have been that bad or worse. So it's sort of a trigger point for you might want to do some extra prevention activities, you might want to do some extra patrolling, you might have some extra crews on standby, etc. for managers. And then the stuff in the lower right, don't worry about that too much. That's just sort of some details about how the models are being run. Again, this is energy release component. Sort of the best comparison to the energy release component. This is for Rachel Carson National Wildlife Refuge in coastal southern Maine. And you see the buildup index on the left and the energy release component on the right. We're probably just going to be publishing the energy release components for the state of Maine moving forward, but we know some of you are familiar with the buildup index. They're not the exact same, but they're the closest to you'd compare. The next item that you may see is a burning index. So the burning index is related to the difficulty of controlling a fire due to fire behavior. So the BI is derived from two other components: how fast the fire will spread, which is known as the spread component, and how much energy will be produced, which is the energy release component. So you can have a really fast moving fire, like we talked about earlier with our springtime fires, that doesn't probably produce a whole lot of energy because it's just burning, let's say, cured grass in a vacant field. Or you can have the flip side, which is a lot of heavy fuels that's not spreading very fast. The BI is a number. You get a number from BI, and it's related to flame length multiplied by 10. And I'll show you some examples. So again, as with all of these things, it's important to remember that BI represents the near upper limit. So if you see a BI of 40 in your fire danger zone, your fire weather zone, that's probably about as bad as it's going to be at any one place. There's probably many places in that same fire danger zone that will have a lower rating. You want to dig a little bit deeper beyond what our new mainfireweather.org will show. You can go to WFAS, which is the Wildland Fire Assessment System. There's the web link right there. And you can see basically a daily snapshot of fire danger. And the second bullet for rangers, you can see this through our Google Earth portal. So Eastern Area Coordination Center, which I talked about earlier, they're out in, I think, Milwaukee. If you go to this web link and then you click the fire and fuels danger, or fuels and fire danger tab, there's a ton of good information about fire danger there. including sort of weekly fire danger forecasts for the entire area, and a lot of those visual pictures, snapshots that I was showing you earlier. You can also go check out what our neighbors to the north are doing, the Canadian Wildland Fire Information System. They're a good resource because you can see what's going on just a little bit further to the north. But really, we're surrounded by Canada, so it's probably going on here as well. Say here, skin the fire danger cat, but NFDRS is a system that allows us to share a common language across the U.S. So there's new fire weather zones. So fire chiefs and town wardens are going to need education. They're going to need to be brought up to speed on the new zones, make sure they're comfortable with where they are, make sure they know how to use it, etc. So again, for you, this means you can have instant access to weather data for any station that we have in our network. There will eventually be 41 stations in our network. We have several more stations to go this spring to install once the snow melts. Again, you'll want to become familiar with the BI, the ERC, and the KBDI. And then we may call upon rangers or a trusted fire chief here or there to just check our weather stations or our internet or cell phone connections. We've been field testing a couple of these units for several years and we haven't had too many problems. But as with any new system, there'll be a few bugs. And again, I think one of the last things that this means from you is that we'll get a lot better intelligence from people sort of at the Boise and at the eastern area, Milwaukee level, who are watching national trends. And I think without them having been able to see our data in the past, we got fairly generalized information, and I think we'll get a lot better snapshots moving forward. That are still waiting in boxes to be put up. We hope to get those completed as soon as the snow melts. We do have some stations that are on private property because the Forest Service or the state didn't own a large enough chunk of land that met those qualifications we talked about earlier in terms of clearance. Just want to keep those folks happy for as long as we can. Next winter there'll be a change in the way we calculate fire danger, but it shouldn't affect anything that you see. We hope to get some pocket cards built, and this will look like what we saw from Oosehorn earlier, those graphs. We hope to get some of those built for areas across the state so that folks can really look back and say, oh yeah, it's about as dry as it was 10 years ago when we had that bad fire. Or basically pocket cards are a way to remember the past and compare it to where we are now.